The majority is about building alignment across the left that is anti-racist and committed to radical democracy. And so currently we represent almost 100 organizations across the country. It's the coming together of labor, anti-war, women's rights, feminists, Black, immigrant rights, indigenous rights to amplify our collective power.
It's really important to think about the 20th century socialist experiments as efforts to try to build an alternative to capitalism. And then for us to say what worked, what didn't work, right? Most of the socialist revolutions in the 20th century were in feudal places, mostly agriculture-based economies that hadn't fully figured out how to feed all its people. There was an emergence of a coordinator class that insulated sort of the communist parties, the socialist revolutionary parties from the people, and often led to a failure to develop real, true people, popular, working class ownership of the socialist state. But this did sometimes lead to a culture of suspicion and retribution, and in some cases, violence against people and dissidents, and in some cases, straight out massacres.
Is it that the socialist states that emerged made mistakes, or is state socialism something distinct from a more democratic, stateless socialism?
Yeah. For me, there's a contrast between the 20th century state socialism and 21st century socialism. Instead of the center of it being really the drive for production, in 21st, the drive is for human development. And it is the third way. In my mind, it is the third way and a much more democratic form of governance and decision making.
It's really important for our movements to articulate a vision for our people and for our communities in the US and around the world that centers us, that centers the earth, that centers people, and is an actual alternative to the thing that we're fighting against.
It's worth studying and knowing that there are other ways, other kinds of formations outside of a nation state that we can organize ourselves in, and that this is an example of that. It's a region of about 4.6 million people. We have the Kurds, we have the Assyrians, you have Arabs. There are also small populations of Gypsies. There are other people, and it's trying to be multi-ethnic, right? But it did come out of a political trajectory of Kurdish fighting. The question around whether it's a state, one, where the power and decisions are being made, right? Which is at the local and sub-council level, and that the larger charter of confederacy is really around enforcement, but not the decision-making place. And that the power of military is also, and militia regions are also at the local level.
This conversation makes me hope that we can have a conversation about democracy. Because I'm not fighting for everybody to be able to make every decision. I come into this with an idea that we have a set of values and ideologies that we want enforced that are not popular necessarily. So we want to end sexual violence. Who cares what you think? We want to end sexual violence. Right, so that's
ideas that are created and maintained in isolation are not necessarily ideas that are going to get our people free and move us towards liberation. It's actually when we disagree with each other, where we're willing to be in community with one another, to understand each other, and think about sort of why, where are the disagreements coming from? Where are they rooted in?
We grow up in capitalist society, which shapes us to think about our interests as individuals. Right? It's in our wiring basically at this point. But that experiments in more collective decision making in socialist projects show that when people are given structures over and over to actually practice a different thing, that people develop those capacities.
We do have evidence of how people have been transformed from collective perspectives into individualist perspective. What that means, that you can also transform the other way, that there is no such thing as human nature, that it's a set of social relations in which people live that produce what people are.
By understanding the problem, we can then develop strategies to confront it and really build power for our communities, because you can't fight a problem you don't understand.
I don't know that we're anywhere near a place where we can begin to develop a coalition to defeat Trump. The question for me is, do we want to devote our energies to defeating Trump?
The people who came up with this included a bunch of abstentionists, like leftists who are like, we don't do anything with electoral politics, right? And the way that they ended up coming to unity on that was when they did the mapping around balance of forces. We're in the conditions that we are, not the conditions that like we wish we had. And the reality is that Trump has actually decided a significant enough threat that we have to contribute to defeating Trump to make more possible. And it doesn't say we're going to take the lead to defeat Trump, because it's like you were saying, that we're not in position to do that. The Democrats are in position to do that. But that we can make a contribution that helps set the conditions for something new to happen.
There are, you know, a lot of white liberals and black liberals who are upset about Trump. So let them be anti-Trump in this moment. Let them mobilize the forces to get Trump out of office. So I support that. I don't see that as my domain. What I want to do is to push the conversation in an even more radical direction.
I hear what you're saying, Pramila. But masses of people are in those organizations. Right? That's where masses of people are. It is in those organizations where we need to be to help to move things to the left and to help to make some of the connections. I mean, everybody doesn't have to do the same thing, and that's the advantage of a collective. You know, some people can be assigned to work inside, some people can be assigned to work outside, but I don't think we let them go.
But like, what would it take? What are the kinds of forms of organization? What's the level of infrastructure? I mean, people power, organization power, consciousness, strategy that begins to get us to think about this, like how we can begin to set a political agenda that can vie for something that then creates a wing, a pole to the left for the masses of folks.
So in the 1930s, when FDR came into office, he was a fairly conservative president. He moved far to the left, further to the left than he was, because of mass protest that was happening in the street. What we're doing is like actually creating a black revolutionary model that can then push more liberal folks a little bit more.
I think what's missing in, I think where like the majority is trying to play a role, where left roots is trying to, like we need forms of organization that can get to scale, so that we can build infrastructure that can actually begin to set the political agenda.
Whether you're in the movement for Black lives, whether you're part of the immigrant rights movement, whether you're part of the indigenous rights movement, whether you're fighting for economic justice, to be a place where our movements come together, where we debate, where we think out loud together, where we strategize. Those who have harmed our communities over and over and over again, they can understand just how powerful we are when we're together in a way that, that can last over time.